The NBA draft is tomorrow. The biggest draft for the Pacers in 3 decades. You could argue even longer is in one day. What are the biggest storylines? What do the Pacers need to consider? We'll break it all down today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the West Side Community News. And today we are one day from the draft. We heard from Vice President of Player Relations, Ryan Carr. That means every pre-media thing, every workout is done. The Pacers are set and ready to go. And they have a lot to consider because they have not picked this high, as has been well broadcasted, in 33 years. They have not won less than 30 games in 36 years. How do they break out of that? How do they get going? Let's cover all the biggest storylines from this draft for the Pacers because there are quite a few. Joining me to do that, someone who stood right next to me, Ryan Carr, the Vice President of Pacers player, I just forgot his title, personnel, told us that he does not feel pressure about this draft, and that's where I want to start here. It's James Boyd from the Indianapolis Star. James, what did you think of what Ryan Carr had to say to us today ahead of the draft tomorrow?
Yeah, so obviously I wrote about that. I didn't even include the line about no pressure because I'm like, there's obviously some pressure. I mean, come on.
That's
like
right.
the stakes are as high as they've been. And like you said, 30 plus years, you have to strike, gold with this pick in a sense. Doesn't have to be a superstar. Of course, that would be great, but it has to be a good player. And I think that, a lot is riding on this, and this could really determine how long of a rebuild this is for the franchise.
100%. I like the way he answered it because he told us last year when they picked 13th that they prep 1 through 80 their big board every year with their tiers and whatever they do. And I'm sure it's more than that, but that's just what they told us. And so I wondered this year if they had a higher pick, if they felt more pressure. And internally, the Pacers do not because they prep 1 through 80 every year. They're ready. They like where they're at. But I feel like, externally and from a fan perspective, yeah, the pressure's there, Mr. Carr and the Pacers front office. It's going to be fascinating. Let's jump right into some of the storylines. And I think that kind of segueing from that pressure, the big one to me, the big storyline is just how massive this draft is for the Pacers, right? And even if you mentioned the word star, whatever level of player you want to determine comes from the 6th pick. And this draft isn't as good as some past ones, right? So like getting an all-star would be a good, great, whatever you want to call it, pick here at 6. But just in general, the Pacers never picked this high, even in a weaker draft. I think the biggest story is just how important this draft is for both the future of the Pacers and, like you talked about, how long the rebuild is, and not only that, how they build their team around Tyrese Haliburton. This draft's important for that too. They have one dude. You need multiple in the NBA. I just think it's so critical, this draft for the Pacers, and what they do on Thursday is going to determine so much of what their franchise is for the next, several years.
Absolutely. I mean, I've talked to a few draft analysts, and the consensus is like, you got a head start by getting Tyrese Haliburton last year in exchange for Domantas Sabonis, but you can't stop there, and you have to get a player that pairs alongside him. And I think that should be, arguably number one on the, big board as far as players to evaluate, players you want to bring in, players you hope to add to your franchise, because obviously you want to choose the best talent, especially in that 6th spot, but you have to think about fit as well. I mean, you have to be able to pair them with Tyrese Haliburton. And one good thing about it, though, is that Tyrese is a relatively easy player to pair someone with. He's unselfish. He can create his own shot. He can shoot from the outside. So there's no really like holes in his offensive game, but you probably want to get somebody who can be in that wing spot, or even like a guy like Keegan Murray. I'm sure we're going to talk about potential picks and things like that, but someone who can add something on the defensive side as well, because to me, although Miles Turner will most likely, return to form and be a pretty big, rim protector like he's always done in his career, the Pacers, as much as they need, I'm sure the fans love to talk about who can score and do all these step backs and who did what. You need some people that can play some defense as well. So that has to go into consideration. I think, all these factors kind of make this a fascinating opportunity for the team, especially because in that 6th spot, who knows who will be there.
Yeah, that's the tough part for talking storylines is like all the guys that make up the storylines are the top 5 guys if you count Murray in that crew. And the Pacers and Carr said this today, right? They kind of 7 players, right? That was their demarcation line of
Mhm.
in the 5 picks ahead of the Pacers front office feels there are 7 players who could go in some order of that top 5, and I think we kind of have an idea who 4 of those 7 are. So who the last one is kind of the wild card. But that's what makes this so interesting and so important is what contingency plan do they have? Are they ready to go? And to your point about Halliburton, I think he's pretty malleable in general, even if they do pick another guard. Like
Mhm.
he's a great shooter, he can play off ball. It's not like perfect, but he can play with anybody. So I think they should just pick the best player, even if they should pick a wing if there's a tie, for example. But that kind of makes it easier to me that they should just pick the best player. But in general, if they don't end up with the best player or they end up with someone who doesn't pan out at the 6th pick, I mean, then they are locked in basically to Halliburton, Duarte, Jackson, and maybe they have a good pick next year too. In fact, if they miss this pick, they probably will. But they're looking at that being their core, and that team is basically 1 year away from getting expensive. That's what makes this pick so important too. So setting the stones and setting the foundation for your rebuild, retool, whatever, it happens in this pick. And if the 5 picks go the way that they think they will, maybe they'll get someone they like. If they don't, if they make a move, who knows? But that it's just so massive, especially with big paydays coming up for some key guys.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, this is the time to you look at some of these teams around the league, the ones that are usually successful. That's because they've got these players or certain caliber put on basically discounted contracts. You can't wait till they
Right.
get really, really good and then try to go out and get all these guys. You can't afford them. So, and then obviously the big point that everyone kind of knows about Indiana is you're not going to land that free agent. You're not going to be able to have that blockbuster trade. So you need to strike gold in the draft. And, that's kind of how you've done it in the past when you're able to have successful teams. Like you drafted Reggie Miller, you drafted Paul George. And obviously, if you draft a player that could be, either of their talents and kind of compare to them, that would be like a home run. And it's funny because, I think Reggie was number 11 and Paul was number 10. So, look at this draft class. There are some interesting guys in that 6 range who have star level potential, who could be, one of the better players in the draft. So obviously we won't know until like 4 or 5 years down the line. But I do think there has to be some mixture of upside as well as can they contribute right now to this team? Because I don't picture the Pacers, although I personally think that they should really go all in on a rebuild. I just don't think that, knowing what I know about the franchise, I don't think that they're going to really go like just full blown like Detroit or OKC. I think their plan is to try to get back in the playoffs within like the next 2 years.
Well, I hate to jump ahead of you again, but that is my second storyline that I'm monitoring this draft is what we'll learn the Pacers timeline on Thursday, I think.
Absolutely.
To some degree. I mean, not 100%. What's Kevin Pritchard's analogy? They're the boat that could spin and go a bunch of different directions on the
Mhm.
water, whatever. Sure. But like, if these Brogdon chatter and it's, yes, it's heating up now, but it's been going on for months. And this Turner stuff, he's been on the trade talks forever, basically. If those do materialize or don't, we'll learn a lot about the Pacers' direction. If they end the draft with both of those guys on the team and they just pick at 6, yeah, maybe they're trying to retool, a word that they did use in Kevin Pritchard's presser. They also have used the word rebuild since the trade deadline. Maybe they trade those guys for picks, or maybe they aggressively move up or move back. But when I kind of view a big picture story for the Pacers out of this draft, besides how important it is we'll finally know. There will be no more words to describe it. There'll be no more guessing. We will finally know what their direction is and how they plan on going forward, which will determine what they do in free agency, what the expectations are for their season, how long they plan to not be competitive. If that's 0 days, that's possible too. We will finally learn that, and I think that's a big story headed into this draft as well.
Absolutely. I mean, that's everything. I mean, I'm sick of all these mock drafts. James, who would you pick?
I don't read those anymore. I'm done with it.
What are you hearing? I actually did basically like reach out to a few draft analysts to get their thoughts because I was tired of hearing myself talk about, the same guys and share my opinion. I got a few more in there to get their thoughts. It was actually insightful, but I just think at the end of the day, you don't know until you know. And the thing about this draft is because the Pacers are again, picking for the first time this high in a very long time. And then also you're trying to figure out, okay, what other roster moves could potentially happen on draft night. I do think that in some senses, it makes sense to try to move on from Brogdon and Turner or whatever. I think Brogdon's probably more likely just because of the injury history, the money, he's owed, and the makeup of the team and his age. Miles, I could kind of see them holding out, see how he fits with Tyrese Halliburton. But the interesting thing about him, and we joked about these trade rumors every year of his career, this is the year, though. I mean, right. He's going to get traded or he's going to sign an extension. It's one or the other. I mean, they're not going to let him walk for nothing. So I feel like this is going to be like just the first domino of a very busy season for the Pacers, because this season could very well set them up for a, good future or set them back, as they rebuild.
Yeah, among the people I've talked to, they've all described Brogdon as more available, but I kind of share your thought that like Turner's contract situation means it's more likely he gets traded at some point. So I wouldn't say that he's necessarily more likely to be traded on draft night, but I think if you ask me like in 6 months from now, yeah, maybe it's more likely that he's traded than Brogdon if they don't find a deal they like on Thursday. Either way, though, again, that's part of their direction. And Turner is sort of the litmus test specifically for me. Brogdon's 29. We know he's old. Old. That's not old, but given the Pacers' current core ages, that's
he's
old.
A senior citizen according to basketball people. Because apparently Keegan Murray is a senior citizen for being 22.
Okay, I actually saw people talking about this and it made me laugh. First of all, I don't view either Keegan Murray or Jaden Ivey as old, just to get that out of the way.
Right.
But people talk about Keegan Murray like he's old and like a finished product, and Jaden Ivey like he's got all this potential, and they're like 8 months apart in age or something like that. I'm like, wait, what are we doing here? But the reason I feel like a Brogdon trade would be more likely, at least on Thursday, is he is 29. He's definitely outside the age of their core, whereas Miles, and he's been my litmus test for what their direction is going to be, he is 26. You can kind of put him in either group. If they're trying to be good, great. He's already good. He's a vet. If they're trying to be young, 26 is not old. It's still a growing age. It's probably your last pre-prime year, but it's right there. So those two guys make a lot of sense. Maybe Buddy Hield's name sneaks in there. Maybe TJ McConnell's name sneaks in there. I don't know, but we'll learn a lot about the direction of the Pacers given those names on Thursday. Hey guys, one short little break here so I can talk about the good folks over at betonline.net, your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs and Major League Baseball, right over at betonline.net, who are your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more scores. They've got the Stanley Cup Finals Game 4 right up there. Lightning favored by 2.5 at home, looking to even the series up. Stanley Cup Finals, very fun for a guy who doesn't watch that much hockey. And betonline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. They're the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf, as well as all the betting action you can get over there. Head over to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action over at betonline.net. BetOnline is where the game starts. Give me a storyline that you are tracking for the draft on Thursday.
I think I'm very interested to see if they trade back and try to get, that number 10 pick from Washington, number 11 from the Knicks. Those reports out there that those teams are basically willing to listen to trade partners if they get the right offer. And I think in the Pacers' case, Malcolm Brogdon could very well fit some of those team needs. I talked to Chase Hughes. He's over at NBC Sports Washington, and he was saying like he thinks that Brogdon would basically be a perfect fit for the Wizards because he's a bigger guard. You remember Bradley Beal's, he's a shooting guard, but he's 6'3". So you want a bigger guy next to him. You want a true point guard next to him. He's someone who could come right in right away and contribute. And if Beal is kind of holding the franchise hostage, like, hey, I'm not going to re-sign unless you go get a guy, and I think that could very well be, Malcolm Brogdon. So I'm very interested to see if they do that and then try to go after a guy like, Jeremy Sohan or someone who can, add to that young core. And I think personally, if they're able to keep that number 6 pick and move on from Malcolm Brogdon and add, I don't know what other assets they'd have to add in to make it all work. But if they're able to some kind of way get the number 6 pick, keep the number 6 pick, and also gain, number 10 or number 11, I think that would be a very good, strong start to the draft for them because there are some good players, outside of that, like, top 5, top 6, top 7 range, who could come in right away, contribute, and still have a ton of upside.
Yeah, it's a fascinating draft in that way because there is such a big tier of players after that top 4, right? As everybody's kind of described it. And from our seats, as we go into all these workouts, like that tier after 5, they brought in every single one,
Yeah.
right? Keegan was in, Matherin was in, Shaden was in, Daniels was in, Johnny Davis was in, Sohan was supposed to be in. I'm missing one. I cannot. AJ Griffin was in. Like the Pacers saw all of them because they want to see them all. But now they have intel on these guys. So if they do make that Brogdon move you described, they're ready, right? They've gotten this stuff to talk about it. And I agree that the second lottery pick or the trade or whatever, because the Turner to Charlotte, which by the way, that's been a rumor since. Good Lord. I mean,
forever, it seems like.
Forever. Shaden Sharp was like 12 the first time that rumor ever came out. Maybe it's that, and that's 15 or 13, whatever. There are ways for the Pacers to get a second one of these guys that they've brought in and taken a look at. Not that workouts mean a ton for guys they like or don't like, but given how that tier has been described by most mock experts, I would say that that's something reasonable to consider. So those trades are definitely a big storyline for me to watch. And you know this because you've talked to Kevin Pritchard just as much as I have, publicly at least, since the draft, is like, the thing that he talked about on lottery night was his Portland draft when they got Brandon Roy and LaMarcus Aldridge. Rudy Gay, Brandon Roy, and Randy Foye all in the same draft has always been really hard for my brain to sort those guys out. In Portland, they had, I think going into the draft, they had 4 or 6 or something, and they ended up making moves, and they got Aldridge and Brandon Roy. Hugely successful draft for KP. He was willing to move some pieces into vets to make that happen, and he brought that up when they ended up at 6 this year. So it would not surprise me to see them do something similar, or maybe they stay at 6, whatever, maybe they don't, but maybe they also trade some vets to get that second first-round pick so they can say, okay, this year sucked. We won 25 games. But now look what we have to show for it. 2 lotto guys who we love and are excited about. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Optionality. That's the word. Right. I didn't even know it was a word until he said it was a word. And I was like, wow. And then he said something else like there's this,
no. First he said optionality, then he said it again, then again, and then again. And then
he was like, it was it's at a higher beta than ever. I was like, what language is this?
I forgot about that one.
Long story short, I do think he's speaking facts when he talks about them having options, because since they're not in that top 4, even top 5 range, you don't know what the other teams are going to do. So you're kind of at the mercy of the other teams. And because of that, you should keep your options open much more than if, say, you had a top 3 pick, top 4 pick. But I'm interested to see how likely they are to at least, I don't know. I can't, read minds. I can't tap into phones and things like that. But I'm interested to see if they just check the tires on the Kings and they're like, hey, we were good to each other before. Hey, are you interested again? And so unlike Twitter, who tells me that, I would, absolutely love to see Miles Turner, they say this, to go back to the Kings. How funny would that be? That would not be funny. That would be a very interesting, I don't even know how it would happen. I don't think that he's the one that would go to the Kings at all. But I do think, hey, you at least check and say, hey, what would it take to move up to number 4? Is it number 6? Is it Brogdon? Is it someone else? I've seen some of these proposed, trades, and some of them I would just run from. But I do think that they at least have to explore all this stuff. And from what talking to, Ryan Carr, he seems confident that they have vetted all this stuff. I'm sure they have. I mean,
of course.
He said it. You make a very, very big decision, and even though they won't say it, like, these are $1 million decisions. Like, these are not something where we just, like us, and we take our job seriously. But it's not like they just wake up, watch some highlights and watch some film and then make a list. Like, no, right. They're very much engaged with all of these things, and that very much matters in this process. I mean, even talking to Jeremy Sohan, when he was talking to us through Zoom, he said he met with the patient's psychologist and physician. Right. And that lets you know, like, wow, if they're taking this really, really serious, and kind of peels back the curtain to how serious it is for these teams to know everything that they can about these players without, like, literally getting into their own skin and being them.
100%. And Carr always says this, and this is always a known thing that people forget about when the picks are made. Like, we as media and even people as fans, we can go watch a game of Iowa basketball and tell you about Keegan Murray. Keegan Murray, I bet, hit the Pacers radar in 2017, 2018 for the first time. You know what I mean? Like, they know about him from forever, right? All the top guys, they've known about them for forever. And so Ryan Carr talks about knowing them as people. Like they can go back and they have all these connections. They know all the AAU circuits and all the college coaches, right? They know more stuff than we know at every single turn, right? So that's also a big factor in this that is harder to consider. On the trade front, for me, what I'm interested in beyond, I agree that the Brogdon Turner for late lotto stuff is fascinating to me. The other thing I'm curious about in terms of optionality is do they move 6 in a move back or forward? Um, because so the forward argument to me is you don't pick this high ever, get the best dang player you can. If it means you trade 6 and other stuff to get up to whatever 4 or 5, you do it. I think I get why people would be opposed to that, but to me, you don't have this option very much. The 6th pick is like the best trade asset the Pacers have had since PG. Vic could have been higher, but he got hurt a bunch, right? This is a huge thing. Or the flip side of that is there's this huge tier from 5 to 10. If all the top 4 guys are gone and you can't get any of them, do you say, well, if we go back from 6 to 10, we can still get someone in this tier and pick up something else? Those two things both make sense to me. I would understand both decisions. I mean, they can't do both, but I would understand both paths. So I'm curious how they will be thinking going into this draft. And I think Pritchard will be more of the move up aggressive type, given his history and given how important this draft is. But that's not to say it would be dumb for them to not be that. And so I'm very curious how they'll think when they're on the clock or when the draft starts.
Yeah, I wrote about that. I think that if you absolutely know someone is your guy, if you're sold on him being a star or being the future of your franchise, do whatever it takes to get him, and you worry about the rest later.
100%.
And if that's how you feel about Jaden Ivey, for example, if he can be, as special as those make him out to be, and I'm not saying he can't be, I'm not saying he can, I'm just saying he seems to be the one, I would say the most after the draft combine that's gotten the most buzz about being, hey, everyone's talking about these top 3 guys. Is he one of those top 3 guys? And so if he's a guy you think you should move up for, absolutely make that decision. Absolutely do it. But, you can't have any hesitancy about it. You can't have any, rear view mirror looking like, oh, dude, no, you have to know that's your guy. And then you have to live with it, obviously, if however it pans out. Obviously you want to pan out well, but that doesn't always work out that way.
One more break here, guys, so I can talk to you about Built Bar, who are making the best tasting protein bars ever, all 100% covered in chocolate, delicious protein bars that basically taste like a candy bar. And they have a new mud pie flavor that I've tried. Oh my gosh, it is so delicious. Built Bars are always coming up with new amazing flavors, and they've outdone themselves with the mud pie flavor. It's absolutely fantastic. If you're a chocolate fan, sit down. You'll want to have this one. It's got the whipped cream and chocolate mousse flavor right in it, covered in 100% real chocolate, as well as topped with cookies and cream crumble. You have got to try it. And they saved the best for last. It's actually good for you. All Built Bar products are low calorie, high protein, and low sugar. Mud pie flavor, for example, 16 grams of protein, only 150 calories, and 8 grams of sugar. It's like your mom baked the most delicious, creamy chocolate mud pie and wrapped it up just for you. They're available at Built.com right now, along with their other amazing flavors, including my personal favorite, peanut butter brownie. Go try them today at Built.com. Use the promo code LOCKED15. You'll get 15% off your order. That promo code, again, is LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Do you have any other storylines you want to dive into for this draft? There's a ton more. But
I think the Shaedon Sharpe storyline is huge. And this is what I want to get on record. Okay, so.
Oh, okay.
I think that everyone's, at least from the media perspective, and I think it's partly our fault, badgering this kid about why he didn't play at Kentucky or whatever. Because I'm not a lot of you telling me when I'm talking to him, I was like, I don't care anymore. You can't go back into the past. You can't change it. He's not going to say what he, I guess, reveal why he really didn't do it. But here's my thinking. This is just my theory. If I was 19 and someone told me, hey, you don't have to play this year, in 3 or 4 months, in 6 months, you're going to be a millionaire. Your parents are never going to have to work again if you just don't play. Now, of course, this is the game I love. This is the game that I'm great at. This is the game that I became number 1 player in the high school in the country at. So I understand like how hard it would be to sit out, but I don't think he'll realize the magnitude of that decision. Like if he plays and his stock drops, that's not good for you personally as a player. But 2, if you play and you get hurt, and then your stock's over. So I think that he made personally, even though it might not seem like the best optics, looking at the amount of money that he's going to make, the amount of financial stability he can have for his family, I think he made the right decision. Now, I understand people will say, oh, it's all about money for you. Yes, it would be all about money for me until I am paid, and then I will give you everything that I have as a player. But again, this is generational wealth we're talking about. And then again, this is the kid that's 19. Could he have interviewed better? Absolutely. Do I think that a year of just talking to reporters at Kentucky, even the semester that he was there, could have helped? Absolutely. Could he be probably a little bit more humble? When I asked him, do you think the learning curve is going to be steeper going from high school to the NBA, or as opposed to going from college to the NBA? He's like, no, it's going to be about the same. He should probably get better answers than that. Even if he just lies to us and says the right things, all of that makes sense. But I do think that people are a little too hard on him because they're not understanding the magnitude of the situation. Like, this is not, and then the flip side of it is, if, he's not as good as everyone kind of projects him to be, and he's, becomes a quote unquote bust, whatever. You wanted life. You're a millionaire. You still don't have to ever work again. And I think that based off that alone, he earned that. Like, you don't dupe your way into being a potential lottery pick. So I think that there's some promise there. Now, where he goes, how high he goes, kind of depends on the mystery. But I do think that the kid is talented, and we kind of have to pump the brakes with so much criticism about him, his decision, because if we were in his shoes, are you telling me that you're going to risk, $20 million on 6 months of basketball at Kentucky? I don't know.
Yeah, it's 8 figures. Like, he'll make, if he gets picked top 10, he makes 8 figures. So like with him, and I'll tie this to the Pacers in a second, but I agree with everything you just said. Like, and he's going to be a litmus test for a ton of athletes. If he goes pro and he's any good, right? Any good, this is going to happen a bunch, I think. Like, I think a bunch of dudes are going to go, well, the NIL money's nice, but if I just show up on campus for 6 months, I can just go pro. This is great, and that's fine if it keeps working. I mean, excuse me, that's fine for NBA teams. College teams will be like, well, no,
right?
but I think he's going to be a fascinating litmus test there. And I actually appreciate guys who don't lie in their answers, so I'm okay with him being that blunt, and I think you appreciate that too. But you got to do it better, like with a smile on your face or something like that. You know what I mean? There are those tonal things that matter a lot in those answers. And even like, did you see the video the Pacers put out of their in the film room interview with him? Like, he was more uppity and smiley in there. Maybe it's us. Maybe we're intimidating.
Yeah, I think, in all seriousness, I do think that in those Pacers interviews that they post from the team account, they're asking all the prospects softball questions.
Yeah,
they're not going to ask anything that's that's really controversial and post it. So I do think, though, from the Pacers' perspective, maybe you'll agree, I would not draft him. No, after talking to him through the national Zoom, after talking to him in person, he would have to have killed this workout. And I mean, like, absolutely destroyed it for me to think, like, okay, this guy's legit. Because even keep in mind, the guys that he's working out with still aren't as good as the pros he's going to face.
Right.
So that's the other thing. It's like, yes, he's playing against competition, and it's not a 5-on-5 game. So, like,
hey, he might go against Jake LaRavia at some point. Jake LaRavia is at.
Oh, absolutely. This is true. And Jake LaRavia can ball. But what I'm saying is, I don't think Jake LaRavia can walk on the floor right now and be one of the best power forwards,
100%.
one of the best forwards in the NBA. So 100%. That's the part of it where I'm like, I just don't know. And I think that other teams kind of make sense more for him. Like, if he drops to 8 and he goes to the Pelicans, to me, that's like the perfect situation, because you don't have to come in right away and contribute. You're on a playoff team. You got CJ McConnell there to help you along, and you're not expected to produce right away. And again, I do think his learning curve is going to be steeper because he's essentially going from high school to the NBA. I get it. He's a super athletic. Reports out there that he has a 49-inch vertical and he can jump out the gym. And I watched some of his highlights, and it is freakish stuff. But, I mean, there were a lot of high school prospects that were phenoms in high school. They got to college and they weren't that, or they got to the pros and they just weren't that. So we'll see. I just think that it takes a team that maybe is pretty good, like the Pelicans already, or a team that has a ton of front office support and a very long time to get better. So I could see potentially, a team like the Pistons, going after him, something like that, more so than the Pacers.
James, my phone's ringing. It's the Thunder. It says we're the
Hey,
perfect fit.
you see what I mean? Like teams like that have
Yeah.
fully committed to we're gonna lose and we're gonna sign guys and play them 40 minutes, at the end of the season so we don't lose, our chances of trying to get a top 3, top 2 pick. Those are the teams that are I think are more interested in him. I don't think the Pacers would take that risk just because if you miss, then you set your franchise back. I think even more so than now, and probably a couple of seasons.
Yeah, to close thoughts on him and tie it to the Pacers. Something that people talk about a lot is like he was the top of his recruiting class. Why does that make him a good pick? Let's talk about the top of the current class,
Yeah.
if we can. The number 2 player on ESPN's 100 from this class is Jaden Hardy. He's not going in the lottery. Number 3 is Imani Bates. He's not even in the draft. 5 is Patrick Baldwin. He's going to go in the second round. 8 is Caleb Houston. He's going to go in the second round. 9 is Michael Foster. He's going to go in the second round. 10 is Kennedy Chandler. 11 is Nate Biddle. Do you know who Nate Biddle is? I had to look up his stats. He played for Oregon and averaged 1 point per game as a freshman, right? Like, not to belittle these dudes. They were good high school players. They were 5-star recruits. But being ranked high means squat to me. Like, it means nothing. Are you good or not? The dip now, to contradict what I just said, I do think Shaden is good. I did hear from one player who worked out with him, not for the Pacers, before anyone tries to connect the dots, that they thought he was the best player that worked out with in this cycle, right? Like, maybe he is good. Maybe he's good. I agree with you. The Pacers should not be pursuing that path. Not because he's like risky or anything. I just think they need to go a little more known commodity in their situation. And that's one of my storylines is like, what kind of player do they pick? Not what position does he play, not how old's the guy. What kind of guy do they pick? Do they pick a well-rounded, less holes in his game, but lower ceiling dude? I'm sort of describing how I feel about Keegan Murray. Some feel differently. Do they go with a higher upside guy who might take some work to get there, but at his best could be awesome, like Dyson Daniels? And Shaden sort of fits that bill as well. But what kind of player do they pick, I think, will be telling as well about how they go forward. And Shaden certainly is a type of player that would tell you a lot about the Pacers' plans. If they go, you know what, we think you could be the best player, but it's a project, well, I'll immediately go, okay, they are not trying to be good this coming season. They are working their way up.
For engagement purposes, he would definitely help our views, our listeners, and things. When I tweeted out that clip, Tony, of him talking to me, I got ratio. Not that they were like yelling at me. They were just everyone was giving their opinion. I love the guy. I hate the guy. He's a great kid. He's a terrible kid. The bottom line to me is that he's 19, and he's in a position that 0.0001% of us ever be in. But like you said, it will be interesting to see if he sets a precedent, because if he is the goods, that's gonna be interesting to see how it all kind of goes down going forward, because he'll be looked at as that example.
James, the gamut of where the Pacers can go is wider and a higher beta than any time that we've been around.
Word.
That is the Kevin Pritchard quote you were referring to.
What is this? Gamut, beta. I was like, whoa. And what's funny? Him and Carlisle, and this is a tangent, but they both use words sometimes where I'm like, whoa, like I have no idea what that means, but I'll Google it right after we get done with this interview. But and all jokes aside, though, I think that he was honest when he said they have to wear.
I agree,
and I think that there's maybe like a big, huge board, in the Pacers practice facility with like all these lines, like if this happens, this happens, and like because you have to be prepared. Because I just got a feeling that it's not gonna go, as planned, and if and we touched on this a little bit, all of us, the whole Ivy King situation is weird to me. Are they gonna take him? They haven't had any contact with him. He doesn't seem to like him. So I'm like, so that kind of makes me think like, if you're not gonna take him, who would you take, and would you willing to trade back and possibly do a deal with the Pacers or another team in the lottery? We'll see. But yeah, I'm excited about it just because we'll finally have some answers.
We don't have to guess anymore.
I know, man. I'm not a guesser, man. And then the thing is, we could tweet something out, and I guarantee you, I can't think of anything off the top of my head right now, but someone's gonna tag me in this game 37 of the season. See, this guy was better than this guy. You said you wanted to pick him over him, and it's like, wow, like you got me. I could not see the future. Sorry.
I was critical of the Aaron Holiday pick in 2018, and everybody thought he was awesome. And I was like, I swear I was the only one who was. Maybe there were more, but he was good in his first couple of games. Everyone's like, see, where are all those people now, James? What do you think about? Anyway, it takes time for these prospects to develop. Yes, that is my last story here. It's not even a Pacers thing. What happens in the 5 picks ahead of them? That is going to define their night.
Yes.
And that was something Ryan Carr said that really interested me today. In the past, even last year, they picked 13, right? So there's a ton of stuff that can happen in the first 12 picks. Like documenting what order 12 guys can go is hard. When you're at 6, there's only 5 picks ahead of you. Like outlining what that could look like is not as challenging. And yet, every year, something happens, right? The last second, the Lakers say, you know what, we'll pick D'Angelo Russell over Jahlil Okafor, for example. That's like the most memorable one to me of like a last second change. Jaylen Brown going 3 was a pretty last second, at least, compared to what the buzz was before the draft, a pretty last second change of heart, right? Stuff like that happens all the time. So, like, do I think the top 3 will probably be Jabari, Chet, Paolo in some order? Yeah, I do. But could it not be? Yeah, that's possible too. What do the Kings do? I don't know. What do the Pistons do? I have no idea. Do the Pacers know? I doubt it, right? So those first 5 picks will be fascinating to watch, and they obviously have a huge impact on what the Pacers do, or they will be what the Pacers do if they move up.
Yeah, it was interesting to me to hear Jaden Ivey say the only teams he worked out for were the Pistons and the Magic.
Yeah, 1 and 5. Very
strange.
strange.
And I was like, what? Like that was kind of interesting to me. But that's the beauty of this draft, since there isn't that Ja Morant, Zion Williamson. These guys are going 1 and 2 in this draft. So we'll see. I mean, there's a lot of things that can go down. I'm sure we'll have plenty of things to talk about. And I'm sure there's going to be something that happens that we couldn't have really saw, especially, when we look at kind of like the way that what the Pacers are going to do with that first pick of the second round. Because this year you could get a first round talent because you're right on the cusp. So I'm mentioning that pick as well. And then, I know they got 58. So we'll see. But after weeks of having, dozens of guys come in, uploading dozens of videos, at least on my end, to the internet and sharing as much content as possible, it'll be good to settle in and kind of get to know these players and kind of think long-term about them instead of these fly-by, like, oh, they might be coming here, they might be coming here. We can take out words like potential and, could or would or maybe. We'll just know concretely this is who they have, this is who they're going forward with. And obviously it's a huge, huge deal because I just don't, if things go right, perhaps you're not picking as high in lottery next year. I don't think you're going to be a playoff team. But if things go wrong, we might be right back here kind of figuring out what went wrong. But I think that they're in a good position because there are some players who still have some pretty good upside or some pretty good right now NBA skills that could help this team.
I agree with all that. I'm looking forward to no longer guessing and no longer pretending to know everything about 14 teenagers who have not played in the NBA yet. I believe we'll both be there. Tomorrow is draft day. James and I believe, will both be in the place where media are supposed to go. I was about to say it, but I don't know that we're supposed to say it. The place where media go for the draft, so you can get tons of inside looks and stuff from all the usual beat guys. But James and I will both be there. You should follow him where? James, I'll let you just do it yourself.
Romeoville Kid on Twitter, Instagram. Don't add me on Facebook. I've had a few people do that after reading a couple of my stories in Indy Star. I appreciate that, but Twitter's a little more informal. I don't consider a lot of you all friends per se, but we can definitely converse on Twitter. I consider you my friend, Tony, but I don't know, man. Like,
wow.
Because that's the thing. I might get on my Facebook and say that I don't like IU, and I don't want anybody that I Facebook friended to come like me and tell me that I can't say I don't like IU amongst my friends. So that's the real reason I can't add you. But all jokes aside, check it out there, obviously, IndyStar.com, and just read all of our stuff. I mean, I've been cheating and reading everybody's stuff, it seems like, a lot more, just because we all have our different thoughts. And again, I feel like we're going to all become a little more uniform as soon as things kind of, get in order.
We'll finally be done predicting the future very soon. Tomorrow, draft preview, obviously, with the latest buzz. Again, Derek Kramer will be stopping by, the most common guest I have on this show, the king over at iPacers blog. So stay tuned for that. And, of course, Friday and a bonus podcast Saturday, talking about whatever the hell happens on Thursday. I have no idea, so I cannot predict what those shows will look like at this time.
Bonus. Ooh, okay.
I know. I gotta talk a lot about the draft. People are dying for content these days. I'm on Twitter at TEastNBA. This show is at Locked On Pacers. That's the easiest way to reach me if you think I said something stupid, which I do every day. So much appreciated when you call me out on that stuff. See you guys tomorrow. Hope you have a great day. And until then, take care.